What if I told you that the person you're most afraid to become is not your enemy, but your destiny? No, not the version of you that smiles on cue, nods at the right moments, says the correct words in the correct order, and keeps everything looking stable while quietly unraveling inside. Not the version of you that learned how to be polite, productive, agreeable, and emotionally convenient. Not the version that mastered the art of appearing normal. I'm talking about the version you buried, the one you were warned about, the one you were told was too much, too intense, too angry, too ambitious, too emotional, too wild, too loud, too unapologetic. That version. The one you've spent your entire life running from, the one you pushed into the shadows because it didn't fit the mold, didn't earn praise, didn't feel safe to express. The one that learned early on that being fully yourself came at a cost. So you adapted. You trimmed parts of your personality. You dimmed your fire. You swallowed your instincts. You learned how to survive by becoming acceptable. And now you think you're choosing freely. You think you're in control. But what if your entire life has been a performance? A carefully rehearsed role. A mask built layer by layer to be liked, to be approved of, to avoid rejection, to stay safe. A version of you designed not to offend, not to threaten, not to disturb the comfort of others. And behind that mask, there's a voice you've silenced so many times that it barely sounds like yours anymore. A voice that once spoke with clarity, hunger, anger, desire, but now whispers, if it speaks at all. You've learned how to ignore it. You've learned how to distract yourself from it. You've learned how to call that silence peace. You tell yourself you're fine. You tell yourself you're doing everything right. You tell yourself your life is good, stable, successful enough. And yet, there's that quiet, familiar ache, that hollow feeling that creeps in during moments of stillness. Late at night, early in the morning, in the pauses between distractions, when the noise fades, the smile drops, and you're left alone with the question you avoid all day: whose life am I actually living? Carl Jung, one of the most influential minds in modern psychology, believed that our deepest suffering doesn't come from trauma alone, or from failure, or even from pain itself. It comes from fragmentation, from splitting ourselves in two, from rejecting and disowning parts of who we are because we labeled them as dangerous, shameful, unacceptable, or wrong, not because they truly were, but because someone else couldn't handle them. And the longer you deny those parts, the more power they gain in the dark. They don't disappear. They wait. They leak out as anxiety, resentment, emptiness, self-sabotage. They show up as a life that looks fine from the outside, but feels disconnected on the inside. The shadow you're afraid of isn't your weakness. It's your unfinished self. And until you face it, integrate it, and reclaim it, no amount of success, validation, or approval will ever make you feel whole, because the person you're running from is the person you were always meant to become. Not because those parts of you truly were dangerous or wrong, but because someone once taught you they were. Maybe your family taught you that anger is ugly, that sexuality is sinful, that ambition is selfish, that sensitivity makes you weak. Maybe society taught you that vulnerability is a liability, that power corrupts, that standing out invites punishment, that being different is a flaw to be corrected rather than a truth to be honored. So you did what every child does to survive. You split. You hid the parts of yourself that didn't fit the rules, the parts that made people uncomfortable, the parts that asked for too much, felt too deeply, wanted too fiercely. You pushed them down. You locked them away. You told yourself you'd deal with them later. But those parts didn't disappear. They sank beneath your awareness, into the unconscious, into what Carl Jung called the shadow. And there, in the darkness, they didn't weaken. They grew, they gathered energy, they waited. And now, without you even realizing it, those disowned parts are running your life. They show up as self-sabotage, as projection, as anxiety that has no clear cause, as depression that won't lift, as addictions you don't fully understand, as relationships that keep breaking in the same painful ways, as fake smiles, as chronic dissatisfaction. as that quiet, unexplained emptiness that follows you no matter how much you achieve. These are not random problems. They are symptoms. Symptoms of a self you abandoned. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are divided. And wholeness, real psychological freedom, will never come from trying to be more disciplined, more positive, more perfect, more put together. Liberation will only come when you develop the courage to turn toward the very aspects of yourself you were taught to fear. This is not a message about becoming your best self. It's about becoming your real self, the self you've been running from, the self you buried beneath years of conditioning, shame, and self-rejection. Because Jung understood something most people spend. There's a place inside you where everything you've ever denied, suppressed, rejected, or feared has been buried. It's not gone. It didn't disappear. It didn't die. It just went underground. Jung called it the shadow, the unconscious dimension of the psyche, where all the parts of you that don't fit the persona are exiled. Every time you felt rage and were told to calm down, every time you wanted to speak up but were told to stay quiet, every time you felt desire and were shamed for it, those parts of you had nowhere to go, so you pushed them down. You tried to forget, and slowly, piece by piece, you became smaller, more acceptable, more tame, more polite. You performed, you adapted, you became normal, but you also became fragmented. And what you didn't realize is that the more you repress something, the more power it gains over you. You think you're in control, but the reality is your shadow is that quiet voice of self-doubt that won't go away, that explosive anger that erupts out of nowhere, that shame that floods you when you speak your truth, that pattern that keeps repeating in your relationships, the envy, the bitterness, the self-sabotage, the guilt. That's not just how life is. That's your shadow running the show from behind the curtain. Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You think you're choosing. You think you're making decisions based on reason, on logic, on values. But unless you've done the brutal work of confronting your shadow, much of what you call choice is actually compulsion. It's a defense mechanism dressed up as a plan. It's your wounded inner world projecting itself onto everything you see. And the most dangerous part, the shadow doesn't just hold the things you fear, it holds the things you need. Your power is in the shadow. Your vitality is in the shadow. Your creativity, sexuality, confidence, assertiveness, your raw instinct to live. They're all in there, buried under years of shame, guilt, and repression. You didn't lose them. You locked them away and threw away the key. But now the vault is cracking, and what's inside is begging to be seen. But most people run. They spend their whole lives avoiding their shadow, terrified that if they let it out, they'll become dangerous, selfish, monstrous. They confuse authenticity with destruction, but the real danger is not integrating it, because what you repress will find a way out through breakdowns, addictions, rage, projection, and emptiness. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It only becomes more chaotic. So, the real question is this. Do you want to keep pretending you're fine while secretly being ruled by everything you've refused to face? Or are you finally ready to look at what you've hidden? In the next part, we'll confront the 4 deepest fears that keep you fragmented and explore how Jung's philosophy can help you reclaim the parts of you that were never wrong to begin with. This is work. Things get uncomfortable, but if you're still here, you're ready. If integrating your shadow were easy, everyone would do it. But they don't, because fear stands in the way. Not surface-level fear, not the kind you talk about casually. I'm talking about existential fear, the kind that threatens your identity, your sense of safety, your belonging. These fears are the invisible chains that keep you divided, exhausted, and trapped inside a version of yourself that feels increasingly false. Let's expose them. The first fear is this: if I accept my shadow, I will become a bad person. You've been taught to believe that your darker impulses define your morality, that anger makes you cruel, that ambition makes you selfish, that desire makes you immoral. that power makes you dangerous, so you suppress them, convinced that repression equals goodness. Jung saw this as a tragic misunderstanding. The shadow is not only cruelty or evil, it is everything you were forced to disown: legitimate rage, healthy sexuality, unclaimed strength, creative fire. When these energies are unconscious, they do become destructive. But when they are conscious, they become choice. Integration doesn't make you immoral, it makes you responsible. A person who knows their capacity for darkness is infinitely safer than someone who pretends it doesn't exist. The second fear cuts even deeper. If I am authentic, I will be rejected. And this fear isn't irrational. Jung never sugarcoated this. Yes, some people will reject you when you stop performing, when you stop being convenient, when you stop being predictable. But here's the truth. Most people never confront. You are already being rejected, just not by others, by yourself. Every time you silence your truth to keep the peace, every time you betray your instincts for approval, you reinforce the most painful rejection of all: self-abandonment. You can be accepted for a mask and feel empty, or be rejected for your truth and feel alive. There is no path where everyone approves. You must choose who you are willing to disappoint. There is the fear of power. If I claim my power, I will hurt others. This fear often comes from witnessing power abused by parents, institutions, authority figures. So you associate power with domination, violence, control. You decide it's safer to be small, passive, harmless. But Jung made a crucial distinction. Repression of power does not make you peaceful. It makes you weak and resentful. True integrated power is not about crushing others. It's about boundaries, about saying no, about occupying space without apology. When power is denied, it leaks out sideways through sarcasm, passive aggression, manipulation, self-sabotage. Power integrated becomes clarity, power denied becomes poison, and finally, the most terrifying fear of all. I don't know who I am without my defenses. This is the fear no one wants to admit. You've built your entire identity around what you are not. I'm not angry, I'm not selfish, I'm not intense, I'm not like them. But what happens when you integrate the very traits you used to define yourself against? Your old identity collapses, and that feels like death. Jung understood this well. Individuation requires a symbolic death, the death of the false self. The ego panics when its familiar structure dissolves. But what feels like annihilation is actually rebirth. You don't lose yourself. You finally meet yourself. These fears are not weaknesses, they are gates. And on the other side of each gate is a version of you that is more whole, more grounded, more real. But understanding this intellectually is not enough. In the next part, we'll go beyond theory and enter the real work. The brutal transformative process Jung called individuation, not as an idea, but as a lived confrontation with yourself. This is where everything changes. Modern culture loves to romanticize self-discovery. Find your true self, they say, as if your soul is a treasure waiting to be uncovered at the end of some peaceful yoga retreat, or neatly written in the pages of a self-help book. But Carl Jung knew better. He knew that becoming who you truly are is not a process of discovery. It's a process of destruction. Jung called it individuation, the psychological journey of becoming a whole integrated self. Not just the socially approved parts, not just the pleasant, polished image you show the world, but the full spectrum of who you are. Light and dark, sacred and profane, noble and animal. Individuation is not about adding more to who you are. It's about excavating the truth from underneath layers of programming, trauma, masks and fear. It's about confronting everything you've spent your life avoiding. You don't find yourself by asking, "Who am I?" You find yourself by asking, What have I disowned to survive? And here's the brutal reality Jung revealed. The more rejected a part of you is, the more critical it is to your wholeness. That means the parts you're most ashamed of, your rage, your lust, your ambition, your wildness, are not obstacles to overcome. They are the keys to your liberation. But to claim them, you must go through a kind of death, the death of the persona, the death of the identity you've carefully constructed to be acceptable, successful, lovable. That mask doesn't come off easily. It's fused to your sense of self, which is why individuation hurts. It's not a clean linear path. It's a descent into the unknown, a confrontation with inner chaos. It often starts with crisis, a breakup, a burnout, a panic attack, a sense that your life no longer fits. That's the psyche cracking open, demanding to be made whole. And when it does, you don't get to control what comes up. Dreams become darker, emotions intensify, memories resurface, desires you thought were wrong begin to demand attention. The things you judged in others you start to see in yourself. This is not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. To become whole, you must sacrifice the illusion of who you think you are. You must allow parts of your identity to die so something more real can be born. And that rebirth doesn't happen in a therapist's office alone. It doesn't happen through philosophy or theory. It happens through experience, through action, through risk, through courage. Individuation is active. It's not a mental exercise. It's a daily confrontation. It requires you to step into the world not as the version of yourself that pleases others, but as the one that terrifies you, because that version is free. And freedom is always terrifying to a psyche trained to survive through submission. But what does this process actually look like in real life? That's what we'll explore next, because theory without embodiment is just more avoidance. And in the next part, we'll dive into the concrete confrontational practices drawn from Jung's own methods that can help you not just understand your shadow, but integrate it. This is the part where you stop thinking about change and start becoming it. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Understanding the shadow is not enough. Reading Jung, quoting Jung, even intellectually agreeing with his theories, none of it matters unless you do the work, because the shadow doesn't dissolve through awareness alone. It demands confrontation. It demands integration. And that means stepping into the fire of your own discomfort and standing face to face with the parts of yourself you've always tried to escape. So, how do you do that? You begin by pulling your projections back. Jung taught that what you most hate, judge, or obsess over in others is often a mirror of your own unconscious, the traits you disown in yourself. So start here. Make a list of 5 traits that trigger you in other people: arrogance, laziness, selfishness, manipulation, coldness. Then ask yourself, where does this live in me? Not in theory, not abstractly, but specifically. When have you acted this way? Where does that impulse show up in your life, even subtly? This is not about shame. It's about reclaiming power. Because as long as you project, you're at war with your own psyche. But when you reclaim the trait, you're no longer triggered. You're whole. Next, E. Engage in active imagination. This Jungian method invites you to initiate dialogue with your shadow, directly in a quiet, meditative state. Visualize the part of yourself you fear the most, your rage, your desire, your sadness, your ambition as a figure. Give it a face. Let it speak. Ask it questions. Why are you here? What do you want? What happens when I ignore you? Write down what it says. Don't censor. Let it speak freely. You'll be surprised. Often what you feared is not a monster, but a part of you that's been exiled for so long it had to scream to be heard. Then begin micro-experiments. in embodiment. Shadow integration is not philosophical, it's behavioral. It must show up in the real world. If you fear being assertive, practice saying no without apology. If you fear being seen, post something vulnerable. If you repress playfulness, do something useless, silly, creative, just because it feels good. These are not small acts. They are revolutions. Each one reclaims a piece of your authenticity. The goal is not to become someone else. It's to remove the barriers between you and who you already are. Write a letter from your future self, the version of you who has integrated their shadow. Let that self speak to you. Let it tell you what changed, what died, what was reclaimed. Let it guide you from the other side of transformation. This isn't fantasy. It's a dialogue with your potential, and it often reveals what your conscious mind is too afraid to admit. Then, perform a ritual death of the persona. Jung emphasized that the mask must fall for the self to emerge. Identify the role you've been playing. The nice guy, the high achiever, the caregiver, the perfect daughter. Write a goodbye letter. Thank it for protecting you. Then burn it or bury it or dissolve it in water. Say out loud, I am not just this role. I am everything I've hidden. I am the full spectrum. These symbolic acts matter. The unconscious understands ritual far more deeply than words. And finally, journal your shadow daily. Ask yourself, what impulse did I repress today? And why? Where did I feel fake or formative? What truth did I swallow? Who triggered me? And what does that say about me? This is not just journaling. It's a mirror, a scalpel, a portal. The more you confront, the less power your unconscious has over you. And the more you reclaim, the more energy becomes available to you. Energy that was previously used to suppress, deny, and maintain the mask. And that energy, that's life force. And once it's back in your hands, everything changes. You stop living a life of shoulds. You stop being predictable. You stop being nice. And you start being real. That's when people begin to say you've changed. But what they really mean is you've stopped hiding. But how do you know if this work is actually working? In the final part, we'll look at the unmistakable signs that you're becoming the person you used to fear and why that's the most powerful thing you'll ever do. When you start doing shadow work for real, things don't get prettier at first. They get messier. People imagine that healing looks like peace, clarity, and spiritual enlightenment. But in the beginning, it looks like confusion, emotional intensity, internal chaos, identity collapse. And that's exactly how you know it's working. Because when you finally stop suppressing what you feel everything. All the sadness, rage, longing, desire, grief, and joy that you've numbed for years comes flooding back. And it's overwhelming because you've been taught that feeling deeply is dangerous. But it's not. What's truly dangerous isn't your intensity. What's dangerous is numbness. What's dangerous is pretending. One of the earliest signs that you're stepping into wholeness is that you become less predictable. You stop agreeing just to keep the peace. You stop saying yes out of obligation while your body is screaming no. You no longer laugh at jokes that quietly violate your values. You stop smiling to manage other people's discomfort. And when that happens, people may start calling you difficult, or cold, or different. But the truth is simpler than that. You're no longer available for performance. You're not interested in being a projection anymore. You don't want to be interpreted, molded, or approved of. You want to be real. Another sign is that you become more polarizing. Some people will feel drawn to you with an almost magnetic intensity, because your authenticity gives them unconscious permission to be more honest with themselves. Others will distance themselves, not because you've done something wrong, but because your truth threatens the roles they still depend on to survive. And that's okay. Individuation was never about being liked. It's about being aligned. And the more aligned you become, the more your relationships reorganize. The false ones quietly fall away. The real ones deepen, strengthen, and become more alive. You stop clinging, you stop chasing, you stop performing emotional gymnastics to be chosen. You also begin to feel less defensive. Criticism doesn't shatter you the way it once did. You can listen to uncomfortable feedback without collapsing or retaliating, because you're no longer protecting a fragile mask. You know your light. You know your darkness. You've sat with your wounds. You've stopped pretending to be flawless. That self-acceptance creates an inner stability, a groundedness that doesn't require constant reassurance, applause, or validation from the outside. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to reclaim energy. Energy that was once drained by repression, by hiding, by pretending, by maintaining appearances, by constantly monitoring yourself to stay acceptable. That energy is now available for creation, for meaning, for depth, for genuine connection. You start to feel more alive, not in a shallow motivational sense, but in a visceral, embodied way. You are finally inhabiting your body, your voice, your instincts, your desires. You laugh louder, you cry deeper. You speak with clarity instead of hesitation. You love with intensity instead of caution. And yes, you will still struggle. You will still slip into old patterns. You will still doubt yourself at times. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. Jung never promised transcendence. He promised wholeness. And wholeness includes contradiction. It includes complexity. It includes imperfection. It includes falling down, losing your way, and getting back up again and again, but this time as someone who knows who they are. So if you find yourself becoming less comfortable, more intense, more honest, more alive, congratulations. You are becoming the person you were once afraid to be. The version of you that no longer betrays itself to be accepted. The version of you that refuses to hide behind a mask. The version of you that isn't broken, dangerous, or in need of fixing. That version is you, emerging at last from the shadows. Now I want to hear from you. What's one part of yourself you've been afraid to accept? Write it in the comments. Even if it's messy, even if it feels vulnerable, even if you don't have the right words yet. This is a space for truth, not performance. And someone reading your words might realize they're not as alone as they thought. And if this video made you pause, reflect, or feel something stir inside you, don't stop here. Watch the next one. You've already stepped onto the path. Keep going.